First of all, thank you very much for watching this presentation on social capital in entrepreneurial family businesses, the role of trust, which is the project I conducted a few years ago with my co-authors Deb Shepherd and Torsten Schmitz. This paper has been published in the International Journal of Entrepreneurial Behaviour and Research. For some background information, in research, what is social capital and how does it influence business operations are two major questions that attract a growing research interest. With the lack of a consensus on its definition, there is general agreement on that social capital is a set of resources based on relationships and networks, and they are exploitable for business outcomes as well. The prior studies identify three major forms of social capital. They are structural, cognitive, and relational, and each of them is of particular importance to business organizations and their performance. So in this project, we focus on trust as a relational form of social capital to understand its effects on entrepreneurial family businesses. Since its emergence, family business research has been conducted across multiple disciplines and is arguably at the intersection of many areas where social capital, particularly the notion of the trust, has been investigated. So, some prior studies argue that family businesses, especially those of a small to medium size, are at an advantage in capitalizing on trust, which is not just due to the long-term family relationships, but also the transaction-based business networks. The existing literature suggests that trust can be an important source of competitive advantage for family businesses. So it needs to be sustained to benefit firm performance in the long run. But there are still some other questions, basic questions remaining unanswered. For example, what is trust? And what are the sources and the types of trust? And also whether or not there is a dark side of trust, or in other words, some side effects of trust. We chose family businesses as a research context. If you look at the family businesses, they are actually at the intersection of three subsystems: the family system, the management system, and the ownership system. They are separated, but they are intertwined, creating a lot of interesting areas for research and understanding. In the entrepreneurship literature, the role of social capital, especially the role of trust in the creation and growth of SMEs, has recently received a lot of attention. It is evident through the existing research that trust as a relational form of social capital is effective in reducing business transaction costs in environments that are not familiar to the form, where uncertainties frequently produce potential risks. Prior studies argue that entrepreneurs are typically pursuing ambiguous, changing, and constructed goals with a set of means that they have control over, while the processes underpinning entrepreneurship are often based on unfamiliar and unstable socio-economic relations. Given such circumstances, trust often serves as either an adapter or a lubricant in these processes, translating the complex and formal transactional relations into flexible and informal bonds between actors, and contributing to the development of social capital as a matter of course. So, following the rationale of prior studies, social capital is generally non-tradable and inimitable. Therefore, it's a unique resource to facilitate the entrepreneur's opportunity creation and exploitation through the use of entrepreneurial networks that enable access to resources beyond the boundaries of the network. So researchers tend to agree that family businesses are an enduring institution for entrepreneurship, usually with an entrepreneurial culture underpinning family entrepreneurial teams. This is particularly because of choosing to be entrepreneurial. Family businesses are more likely to sustain their growth and performance across generations. At the intersection of the family system and the business system, as I introduced it before, family businesses provide combinations of relations and values from both systems, or in other words, the three circles, including trusting relationships, which yield unique and important influences on entrepreneurship over time. Therefore, family businesses provide a rich context, as I said before, in which the effects of trust on entrepreneurship that can be explored. However, empirical research seeks to identify and explain the nuances of trust, particularly its sources and levels, and the effects on cross-generational entrepreneurs in small and medium-sized family businesses tend to be inadequate and fragmented. Existing literature generally takes a static and a single-dimensional view and claims that trust in an unspecified form is conducive to entrepreneurship in family businesses, mainly because trust strengthens relationships in the family and potentially constitutes a source of competitive advantage for the business. While this argument is appealing, the view has recently been criticized, and the scholarly conversation has been directed to the dynamics and the multi-dimensionality of the notion of trust, which is conceptually interesting. Also, as I said before, there is a potential dark side of trust, and this has been suggested in recent works, as high levels of trust may be associated with blind faith and complacency. Empirical evidence is needed to explore the sources and types of trust and the effects on the firm performance. So the exploration is still in its infancy, and the normative belief in the benefits, either they are real or perceived, of trust and social capital for sustained entrepreneurship still prevails. So in this project, we drew on case studies from China and endeavored to answer two specific questions. One, where does trust originate in family businesses? And two, how does trust as a relational form of social capital influence the entrepreneurial processes in family businesses? So in answering these questions, we attempt to explore understanding of the nuances between trust and entrepreneurship in family businesses, and contribute to the ongoing conversation pertaining to social capital and entrepreneurship, which have recently begun to include a family business perspective. So, to conduct our research, first of all, we need to solve some definitional issues. First of all, social capital as a keyword. In general, social capital refers to a particular set of resources embedded in durable networks and interactivities that are useful for creation of value and improvement of productivity. It is distinctive from other forms of capital, such as human capital and financial capital, because social capital typically derives from and also depends on interactions between social actors, rather than being inherent independently in a single actor. Most importantly, there are two perspectives of social capital that have emerged in literature: the structural holes and network closure. Previous research suggests that social capital is a result of structural holes that are inherent in a network structure, enabling an individual to broker between unconnected individuals within his or her network. Conversely, there was another stream of research that indicates that social capital is a result of network closure, allowing for access to information and effective sanctions within the closed network. So due to the network closure, there is an effective means for the development of trust, as the sanctions that group members face from deflecting on the group are an effective control mechanism that ensures behaviour consistent with the norms and expectations of the group. Well, these two perspectives are often viewed as opposite ends of a spectrum. Both types of social capital are essential for the success of an organization. For instance, previous research highlights that in family business internationalization, network ties become more embedded as the trust associated with the relationship increases. Therefore, we adopt the view that social capital and define social capital as the sum of the actual and potential resources embedded within, available through, and derived from the network of relationships possessed by an individual or social units, which captures the essence of both perspectives, the exchange and the interaction between individuals. Next, another key word is trust as a relational form of social capital, as I said before. So knowledge on trust has been constantly developed and advanced in recent years, especially on how it benefits businesses. In organization and management studies in particular, research has grown into a general consensus on the favorable effects of trust in business performance. For example, it is widely agreed that trust plays a positive role in promoting network relationships and collaborations, which reduces role conflicts and transaction costs, and integrates individual objectives for common interests, and contributes to the development of a shared social identity. So these effects are often amplified and become more explicit in SMEs, especially so if they operate in more traditional societies. In principle, trust is believed to benefit firm performance and is therefore advanced as a contributing factor for sustaining firm performance. In spite of the general agreement on the effects of trust, different views exist among researchers regarding the composition and dimensionality of trust. To date, research on trust has produced no single consensual definition, leaving trust an elusive concept. Scholarly conversations continue around the types or forms of trust, emphasizing the sources, objects, and the levels of intentions and the trustworthiness of network actors at an individual, organizational, and institutional level. One particular stream of literature views trust as a dynamic construct that evolves as social interactions increase and relationships are gradually strengthened. Some prior studies submit a three-stage framework to investigate the evolution of trust. They argue that trust progresses in a gradual and sequential manner from calculus-based through knowledge-based to identification-based, primarily as a result of the increase in social interactions and the tightening of interconnections. Well, this stage framework is aligned with the evolutionary nature of trust and provides a roadmap for understanding the evolution of trust in a relational form. In reality, however, trust does not necessarily accumulate in an clearly aligned step-by-step sequence. Rather, development of trust can be reversible and dependent on a range of circumstances and relations that impacts the calculation, the knowledge, and the identification. For example, kinship relations often provide a shortcut for identification-based trust, primarily as a result of intense family socialization with little to no calculus or knowledge-based trust before it. Moreover, distinctions between stages are often quite ambiguous and hard to measure. To this date, research has not been able to provide reliable and applicable criteria to capture the distinctiveness of each of the three stages. Therefore, the stage framework largely remains a concept rather than empirical work. Alternatively, researchers have investigated the source of trust and the objects that trust mainly relates to. Previous research identified three forms of trust, namely personal, collective, and institutional, which occur at micro, meso, and macro levels, respectively. Similarly, there were some other researchers who investigated foreign managers' trust in China, for example, and its effect on local employees' trust within organizations. They observed that trust concurrently exists at interpersonal, organizational, and institutional levels. And the different levels at which trust may develop originate from different sources, but appear to be interactive and interconvertible when circumstances change. Among all the previous studies, one study conducted and published by Sacco in 1992 focuses on trust in business relationships and she proposed three types of trust based on goodwill, competence, and contracts. Again, these types of trust can occur at different levels in different forms, depending on the circumstances under which social relations are shaped and developed. For example, although goodwill trust frequently exists between individuals who share values or norms, such as family members, it can also occur between groups or organizations that have a common background, familiarity, or interest, like family clans, or in business partnerships, where trust is often based on a binding contract or acknowledgement of competence. So our focus in this project is on trust within family businesses, where interactions widely exist between individuals on the family side and influence the business side. Therefore, our investigations concentrate on the interpersonal level. So, to guide our work, we generally embrace the view that trust is a psychological state comprising the intention to accept vulnerability based on positive expectations of the intentions or behaviour of another. By taking this broad view, we are allowed to investigate a wide range of trust that exists between actors in family businesses and conduct comparisons between types of trust within individual businesses as well as across businesses. So this stance is largely in accordance with previous studies, with many previous studies who chose a similar broad definition on trust. So as I said before, generally, trust is treated as a relational form of social capital. Since the social capital literature first emerged, trust has consistently been regarded as an important form of it. So social capital is, in a sense, a result of trust and shared forms among actors within a social structure. While it is unclear the specific types of trust, we refer to, what the previous studies referred to. The argument here is that trust is a necessary condition of social capital, without which durable social interactions become less possible, and leaving very little space from which social capital can be developed. Also, trust as a relational form of capital, social capital, is an essential component in the development of social capital, which requires the presence of shared network ties and a shared language and narrative. Anyway, we suspect that not all types of trust qualify as social capital. Importantly, the term social capital itself has a very strong indication of the eligibility, which is restricted to resources derived from social relations that are able to create value and yield productivity. Therefore, in this project, we view trust as social capital only when it has an effect on the firm's market performance or entrepreneurial processes and outcomes, as we specifically focus on in this study. So the relationship between trust and entrepreneurship, as I said, is highlighted in this project. Given its usefulness in value creation and productivity, social capital is widely regarded as a facilitator for entrepreneurship. As a matter of fact, social capital that was born of networking is conducive to opportunity discovery or creation from uncertain and ambiguous environments, and can be mobilized through the networks to help access and acquire other forms of capital or resources to exploit the opportunity that was created, discovered. Existing literature tends to argue that by capitalizing on trust, the firm is able to produce competitive advantages, hence superior performance. There has been a recent increase in the number of studies on trust and entrepreneurship at their point of intersection. A variety of perspectives have been taken by different researchers, including, for example, human resource management, financing, the entrepreneurial team formation, and business relationships. A lot of studies have been published in these areas. Many of these studies report a significant role of trust as a relational form of social capital in facilitating the firm's entrepreneurial performance. So here, it is worth clarifying that it is actually not our purpose in this project to advocate a positive effect of trust on entrepreneurship. Rather, we argue that as a form of social capital, trust can either facilitate or suppress entrepreneurship, depending on the nature of trust and the entrepreneur's ability to realize and manage the involvement of trust in their entrepreneurial processes. In recent years, the social capital literature has also suggested a dark side of trust on entrepreneurship. For example, by drawing on the investigations on entrepreneurial activities in the Aboriginal communities of Alaska, authors Light and Dana submit that social capital based on mutual trust and the norm of reciprocity promotes entrepreneurship only when a supportive entrepreneurial culture is in place. Otherwise, it may impose mental conformity on all actors in that network, which prevents innovative thinking and entrepreneurial undertaking from emerging. Similarly, some other recent empirical studies on using social networks in entrepreneurial resource acquisition concludes that although a long-term trusting relationship is conducive to evaluating the quality of resources or the resources of or the resource exchange, it is likely to lock the actors within the trust-based loyalty relationship who either knowingly or unknowingly sidestep from new opportunities. Sharing our concerns with these studies, we aim to explore in this project not only how trust facilitates entrepreneurial processes, but also whether the dark side potentially exists and how it might influence entrepreneurial performance of family business. So, trust in family businesses. Does being a family business make a difference to firm performance? If so, what difference does it make? And how is the difference made? So these are the questions that family business researchers have endeavored to answer over time through a variety of different lenses. One specific lens is the development of social capital in family businesses. Previous studies contend that trust serves as an organizing principle for family firms, particularly where family members form the entrepreneurial teams and play a critical role in strategic decision-making, networking, and relationship building, resource acquisition, and organization, and opportunity creation and exploitation. So, in attempting to define family business, there is a tradition of viewing family businesses as a combination of family ownership and management, as I said before. While embraced by many, this approach nevertheless has been questioned. Perhaps its major shortcoming is that it does not clarify whether a family-owned but not family-managed, or a family-managed but not family-owned business is a family business. So in our project, we acknowledge that a family business must have significant family involvement, either in the form of ownership or management, or a combination of both. Whichever form it takes, a family business is an organization where trust provides a central and a fundamental basis for intra-family cooperation. As a matter of fact, family involvement has an impact, explicitly or implicitly, on the firm's objectives, resources, and decision-making, and the trust from the family side is frequently transformed into trust on the business side, and vice versa, often beyond economic rationale. So in fact, family businesses do not just provide a unique context for research on trust and social capital, but also for entrepreneurship inquiries, or perhaps more so for joint investigations of trust as a form of social capital and entrepreneurship, which is what we did in this project. Researchers have made substantial efforts to understand the relationship between family dynamics and the firm's entrepreneurial performance. However, our knowledge about the specific role of trust in family business entrepreneurship is still remarkably little. Most studies report, as I said before, a positive relationship and advocate family businesses to create and sustain their trust relationships. Empirical evidence tends to be inadequate and is therefore highly demanded, not only on the positive effects, but also on the dark side of trust in entrepreneurial family businesses. So, before we talk about the methodology and the methods, maybe a little bit talk on the context of this project. For empirical explorations on the role of trust as social capital in entrepreneurial family business, we believed that China provides a living laboratory where research objects are extensively available, but surprisingly under-researched. In general, it's a unique institutional and cultural environment of China's private economy, as well as the entrepreneurial undertaking and the intergenerational nuances in Chinese family businesses that appeal to us as an ideal research setting. So China's economic reforms take a gradual, partial, and experimental approach, where the legacy of former centrally planned system often intervenes, and this approach creates an environment in which entrepreneurship develops in a different pattern from the more advanced economies, mostly from the West. And China's unique institutional environment has been described as rich in non-tradable inputs and resources, alongside weak capital structures and limited legal protection for property rights, and the ill-functioning information markets and the lack of contractual security. So due to its policy ambiguity and continued distrust of institutional systems, Chinese entrepreneurs often seek alternative sources of support, particularly from their family or family networks. As a matter of fact, families play a central role in almost all aspects of private entrepreneurship in China, providing primary, durable, and stable sources of capital, labor, intelligence, and psychological support. And also Chinese culture, based on Confucian values, emphasizes keen solidarity and trust, which plays a crucial role in protecting the property rights of private entrepreneurs in the absence of clear and effective property rights laws. There is a strong commitment to family in Chinese culture. Family members and close relatives are far more trustworthy than other social members or organizations. Although institutional trust and contractual trust are still relatively low in Chinese communities, interpersonal trust tends to be significant in long-term oriented business activities, with which family businesses manage their resources, build their key capabilities, and pursue entrepreneurial opportunities. After nearly 4 decades in business, most pioneering Chinese family businesses have transitioned or are currently in the process of transitioning through intergenerational succession. So the second generation owner managers, which we refer to as SOMs on these slides, have emerged as a major force in China's private entrepreneurship. So they are arguably more market-oriented and less reliant on the non-tradable resources and the capabilities derived from the family dynamics. Intergenerational disagreements and even conflicts commonly exist between the founder parents and the SOMs or SOMs. Some of these differences contribute to entrepreneurial risk-taking and innovative outcomes. Others depress the entrepreneurial mindset and lead the business to depart innovativeness. As the family dynamics and relations subtly change across generations, the emerging second-generation Chinese family businesses appeal to us as ideal court cases in which social capital, trust, and entrepreneurship can be jointly exploited. So now, let's move on to the methodology and the methods adopted. Because this project focuses on the role of trust in entrepreneurial processes of second-generation Chinese family businesses, we sought to investigate a range of cognitive and behavioral activities. On the one hand, these activities are generally not well understood and inadequately studied, especially in the context of family businesses. On the other hand, existing literature has not discovered how trust in family business promotes or constrains sustained entrepreneurship, particularly across generations. So neither a grounding theory nor promising evidence has been created without the interaction between trust and entrepreneurship in family businesses. Research on how trust influences entrepreneurial processes is still emerging, and our knowledge about the evolution of trust and its effect on entrepreneurship in family businesses remains quite little. And needless to say, it's even scarcer in the Chinese context. So in the absence of an underpinning theory and conclusive data, we chose to employ a qualitative research approach, which provides methods to support understanding of what is likely to be found when the existing information tends to be inadequate. And these methods enable quality, depth, and richness in findings. An important objective of this project was to explore and analyze empirical evidence for the conceptualization of trust as social capital in the entrepreneurial family business context. So this objective reinforced our rationale of employing qualitative research methods, because descriptive and subjective data are required for generation of systematic insights, with which conceptualization and theorization on social relations become possible. So because of these, we conducted case studies in the eastern Chinese province of Jiangsu, which is one of the first industrialized regions in China and characterized by the rapid development of family businesses and private entrepreneurship. Therefore, this region provides sufficient supply of eligible cases, and each case involved a second-generation family business. To study trusting relationships at the intersection of the family and the business, we adopted a traditional approach to defining family business, where the business is owned and managed by the family across generations. Therefore, a basic case selection criteria was that the sons, the second-generation owner-managers, were key decision makers, even if the retired founders were still consulted at times. Although this project did not have an industry focus, all our cases were from the manufacturing industry, to reflect the fact that this is where most entrepreneurial family business in that region are located, as well as to provide a common ground on which cases can be compared. So a list of potentially eligible case companies was first provided by some of my personal contacts in the local chambers of commerce, and then I made initial visits to 12 potential case companies to understand their suitability, and the actual number of cases depended on the quality of connected information as my fieldwork progressed, particularly in line with the interim analysis and judgment on information saturation. As interviews and observations continued, information was increasingly repeated until such repetition became dominant in the roughly 7th and 8th companies, which signaled that subsequent emergence of new themes might be significantly unlikely. So this saturation enabled an understanding of the trusting relationships and their effects on entrepreneurial processes, which in turn led to the development of conceptual model and theory building. As a result, this project eventually included 8 small to medium-sized Chinese family businesses, as I show on this slide. So, to achieve a wealth of information and to ensure the trustworthiness of data collected from my fieldwork, multiple methods were used, including semi-structured interviews, personal observations, and document inspections. Multiple interviews were conducted for each case company, involving the source, the employees, employees from both management and non-management positions, and the SOM's family members and relatives who either directly or indirectly involved in the business, and some external stakeholders like clients and government officials. So, in general, we had 3 to 4 interviews per case, which reduced the dependence on any one individual with the same information gathered from multiple sources, helping to verify authenticity. So, some findings. Now, after processing and analyzing the qualitative data, we compared the sources of trust and identified different patterns of trusting relationships and examined their relevance to entrepreneurial processes in the 8 second-generation Chinese family businesses as our cases. So first of all, as findings, we analyzed the levels and the sources of trust. Overall, it is notable across the 8 case companies that trust indeed played a significant role in their daily management, and particularly in the entrepreneurial processes. So here it is by and large the individual level interpersonal trust that prevailed, as is typically true with small to medium-sized family businesses, which confirmed the existing literature. In these companies, organizational structure is often nuanced by family ownership and management, and it provides a very unstable ground for trust to develop at a more collective level. All SOMs, owner-managers, referred to interpersonal trust as a critical and indispensable resource that either facilitated or promoted their opportunity creation and exploitation activities. On reflection, there were 2 common effects of interpersonal trust in the entrepreneurial processes of these companies. One hand, it effectively freed the SOMs from routine operations, enabling them to concentrate on business development and entrepreneurial venturing. On the other hand, the interpersonal affect-based trust often directed the SOMs to sources of necessary resources for their opportunity creation and exploitation, which were not easily accessible if the trusting relationships had not been in place. Second, it's also quite evident from our work that individual competence and interpersonal goodwill constituted the most reliable and durable source of trust in these Chinese family businesses. However, contractual relationships remained a marginal contributor to the making of trust in these companies. Not surprisingly, family and kinship relationships provided the most profound base on which goodwill grew over time. In nuclear and extended family relationships, the primary socialization usually results in members accepting and internalizing the same or similar family values and norms. The proximity and homogeneity of family relationships normally generates a positive mutual perception, a high level of altruism, and a commitment to trusting and benefiting family members. As a matter of fact, unless the family relational order is damaged by a critical incident, such as radical disputes or conflicts, the immediate family members receive the greatest goodwill trust, while distant and less engaged relatives do very little. Across the 8 case companies, trust between immediate family members was generally greater than with relatives. In most of the cases, there were stable trusting relationships between the SOMs and their parent funders, which had an ongoing impact on the businesses even after their intergenerational succession. Also, we found that family members were not always more trusted than non-family employees or friends by the owner managers. Individual competence has arguably become an additional base on which trusting family businesses develops, and its significance tends to be no less than that of goodwill, which our study mirrors. At Mac 95, one of the case companies, for example, the owner manager's family members were apparently the most trusted. They dominated the management of the business and all decision-making. As the SOM claimed, which was endorsed by his brother and retired father, it was impossible to differentiate the business from his family, and only on the family that he could rely. So his justification was quite simple. He said, blood is thicker than water. So the kinship goodwill dominated the formation of Mac 95's trusting relationships. Well, interestingly, although nearly all family members of the SOM actively involved in the business, including his wife, brother, sister-in-law, and the retired parents, there were no single relative of the owner-manager who worked in the business. So the SOM explained that there was no need at the moment for relatives to work in the business, but they would be considered when a need emerged and if they had suitable capability. Reflecting on these remarks, at least 2 types of trust were indicated here, namely goodwill trust for close family members, which derived from the family relationship or the blood connection, and then competence trust for others, including distant relatives, in this case only good blood is thicker than water. Based on the findings and discussion to this point, we put our first proposition that trusting small and medium-sized Chinese family businesses is mainly constructed at the interpersonal level on the basis of kinship relationships. Next, we spent some time understanding the patterns of trusting relationships. Here, employment is certainly not the only indication of trust in family businesses, and is perhaps not the most important one. Of the 8 case companies, again, Mac 95 was the only one in which family members were overwhelmingly involved in the day-to-day business activities. And this is not the case across all the other 7 case companies. Of the other 7 companies, HITO2, Mac 95, Tax 90, and Tax 92, the 4 companies, employed no one from the owner-manager's family. CHE 92 and Mac 90 employed only one family member. Mac 83 had its owner-manager's brother-in-law as a line manager. It was important, therefore, to understand who had the role or responsibility, either formal or informal, as the so-called second person in each case company. So this second person was not necessarily an employed deputy or delegate of the owner-manager. He or she does not have to be working officially in the company, but this person had significant influence on decision-making and was somehow recognized by both internal and external stakeholders, either explicitly or implicitly, as someone who had the authority to act in the owner-manager's absence. So we didn't name this person as deputy or a delegate of the owner-manager because he or she just was not. So we coined a term second person to differentiate this person's role. Understanding the decision-making underlying the choice of the second person provides insights into the trusting relationships in each case company. As we can see in this table shown on the slide, a second person existed in each case company who was either explicitly appointed within the employment structure or implicitly recognized by both internal and external stakeholders, particularly the management team. Based on the analysis of our interview data and the on-site observations, we identified 3 patterns of trusting relationships in these businesses, which represented, in principle, 3 combinations of goodwill, competence, and contractual commitment. Well, in the first pattern, Mac 95 and Tax 90, if you can see in the table, both had their retired founders as their second persons, and this arrangement was explicitly made aware to all stakeholders in both cases. Although they still acted as senior advisors, both founders had retired and were no longer engaged in the business on a daily basis. And there was no contractual arrangement between them and the businesses. However, their roles in the businesses were critical, arguably indispensable. So their influence was significant on the firm's decision-making and strategic development, particularly in the entrepreneurial processes where resources were needed to create and exploit new opportunities. So they were trusted primarily because they started and led the businesses. More importantly, they were parents of the current second-generation owner-managers who chose to rely on their good intentions. So it was the mutual goodwill between the parent funders and the owner managers, the second generation owner managers, that laid the primary foundation for the trusting relationships in these two case companies. The second pattern was represented by CHE92, MAC 83, MAC 90, and MAC 94, where a second person was from the respective owner managers' families or family clans. We see that in these companies, trust was structured around a careful calculation of competence as a sufficient condition. While goodwill was considered necessary, Mac 90's owner manager, for example, commented that although his wife did not work in the business, she gave intelligent advice, which was highly valuable and helpful for the business over time. So the owner manager also emphasized the marriage and family tie, which made his wife naturally trustworthy, even if she had not been business talented and capable. A similar view was shared by the SOMs of CHE92, MAC 83, and MAC 94. Slightly differently, MAC 83's SOM based his trust on his brother-in-law's competence and the goodwill towards his sister and her marriage. Perhaps there was, well, to some extent, there was contractual trust in the cases of CHE92 and MAC 83, where the second persons, those were relatives of the owner manager, were formally employed by their respective businesses, having position responsibilities and hierarchical powers. However, it was difficult to judge or measure when the kinship ties overwhelmed in these cases. HIT 02 and the text 92 indicated the third pattern, in which kinship goodwill was far less apparent, giving way to considerations of individual competence and contractual commitments. So the second person, arguably as the most trusted persons, were both non-family employees who had worked in the businesses since their inceptions. As such, a sense of belonging and a sense of loyalty towards the businesses had been developed. So these paved a stable ground for goodwill to grow between each of the owner managers and their respective second person. However, it was fundamentally their competence that was perceived and recognized through their long service in the companies that shaped their trustworthiness. According to the owner manager of Tex 92, his deputy was evidently a capable and reliable professional manager who had made significant and consistent contributions to the business since its founding. Similarly, HIT 02's owner manager believed that his senior advisor was a highly committed professional and always did justice to the position and responsibilities associated to his position. So these remarks, coupled with our own observations on site, suggested that in these two companies, individual competence and contractual employment constituted the primary and the secondary considerations in their trusting relationships. Overall, our work has confirmed existing literature on that trust in family SMEs inclines to a concentration on the interpersonal level. In addition, we have also found evidence to question the argument that kinship altruism dominates the trust structure in family-owned and managed businesses. So our findings indicate that although family and kinship goodwill continues to be a major or the most observable source of trust in Chinese family SMEs, individual competence has become an increasingly important consideration in the trusting relationship. Maybe it's partially a result of the government-led advocate of the market orientation in China's private sector toward a so-called socialist market economy, which views the traditional family value orientation as a hindrance to the modernization of SMEs. Meanwhile, the owner-managers grew up with a constantly improved institutional environment and were generally more agreeable with the Chinese government's teaching of so-called modern enterprise system. As Mac 94's owner-manager commented, he said, "After all, a good intention does not bring outcomes, while competence does." So although the family goodwill and individual competence combined constitutes the main source of interpersonal trust in Chinese family businesses, we were also able to observe some emergent indication of contractual trust in the businesses. Therefore, we propose our second proposition, that is, alongside China's institutional changes, trust in Chinese family businesses progresses to less kinship-based type. So next, let's look at some effects of trust on entrepreneurship. The startup of family businesses is a result of entrepreneurial undertaking, arguably, if we take a new venture creation point of view to define entrepreneurship. In this project, we are more interested in the effects of trust on entrepreneurship in established family business, especially across generations. We therefore take a Schumpeterian approach and emphasize the innovative nature of the entrepreneurial behaviors in established companies. In line with this thinking, we investigated the relationships between trust and the source of opportunity, resource acquisition and deployment, as well as the nature of innovations that were produced. It's increasingly agreed in existing literature that trust as a relational form of social capital can benefit small and medium-sized entrepreneurial family businesses. Leveraging trust networks, potential opportunities, and key resources from otherwise remote sources are become available and accessible. Also, trusting relationships are believed to be effective in reducing transaction costs, as they often convert the formal transaction processes into flexible and informal engagements, where altruism rises, which in turn eliminates the costs on credit assurance, for example. We have found in this project that such benefits are widely realized and sought in small and medium-sized Chinese family businesses, where trusting relationships are mainly grounded on interpersonal goodwill and individual competence. In addition to accessing potential opportunities and resources, it is arguable that the most significant role of trust in family business entrepreneurial processes was to strengthen the owner-manager's willingness to accept and further explore the ambiguous and incomplete initial information. All 8 family businesses in this project reported a strong link between their trusting relationships and the determination to exploit a perceived opportunity, which often required a change to their existing business model. Therefore, risks and costs created. When the trusting relationships were primarily structured around kinship goodwill, a family-focused value orientation tended to be more likely to guide the firm's entrepreneurial processes. Opportunities were mainly perceived and created from internal environment, in the belief that pursuing these opportunities would strengthen the existing business and improve the firm performance without having to radically change existing practices, therefore minimization of cost and risks. In contrast, a combination of competence and goodwill trust, which we observed in the four components of CHE 92, MAC 83, MAC 90, and MAC 94, enables the components to reach otherwise remote networks for potential opportunities and resources with fewer restrictions from existing business. And these components were therefore more open to information from the market domain as opposed to the company's internal environment. And this is similar to the third pattern, which was represented by HIT 02 and TAX 92, where trust was formed mainly on the basis of individual competence with little relation to kingship goodwill. And this pattern is the most market-oriented and the only one in which contractual trust was perceived. To summarize the findings so far, we propose Proposition 3 and Proposition 4. Namely, goodwill trust is associated with a greater family orientation and leads to the entrepreneurial processes to incremental innovations, and contractual trust is associated with a greater market orientation and leads the entrepreneurial processes to radical innovations. And next, just very quickly, let's spend a little while on the potential dark side of trust, which we also observed from our project. Despite the benefits, as I said, we were also able to track some side effects of trust on the entrepreneurial processes, and some of which may qualify as negative effects. For example, we noticed a typical strong tie effect in opportunity recognition and exploitation, which was arguably a result of the strong interpersonal trusting relationship leading to oversight of potentially valuable information from distant and but less trusted sources. And this effect was especially apparent in MAC 95 and TAX 90, where an ongoing and stable trusting relationship was in place between the owner managers and their respective funders, primarily based on the kingship goodwill. So in these two companies, the owner managers embraced the funders' ongoing involvement in their business after succession and emphasized the continuity of first-generation legacy. So their entrepreneurial processes both started with an intention to optimize existing business practices and were oriented by the internal assessment and a review of existing business activities. Therefore, both companies did not actively engage with external networks where weak ties might have connected them to more radical opportunities. So both owner managers in these two companies tended to rely heavily on their families, especially the funders, to make and implement decisions. And non-family stakeholders who might have injected extra newness and openness to the entrepreneurial process were not essentially involved in the firm's opportunity creation and exploitation, presumably because they were outsiders, therefore less trusted. While other companies, including CHE 92, MAC 83, MAC 90, and MAC 94, took a far greater market orientation in their entrepreneurial processes and produced radical innovations to their existing business. While reflecting on their trusting relationship, it is notable that besides kingship goodwill, competence was an additional consideration in the formation of trust in these companies, and the owner managers were capable of relying on specific competence for specific purposes in the entrepreneurial process. The emphasis on competence allows the owner managers to be more open to information from sources external to their existing trusted networks. They then use this information to create opportunities and implement innovations at a higher level of newness. On the other hand, there is the possibility that the entrepreneurial processes lead to different outcomes, if not to failure, when the trustee's competence is overestimated. For example, in the case of Mac 83, the owner-manager relied in the first instance on his brother-in-law to negotiate for a desirable price with the firm's main suppliers, and then he had to approach the suppliers in person later because a favorable outcome was not achieved. So according to the owner-manager, the negotiation came into a dead end, which would seriously delay the project so that the company would miss the boat. As a matter of fact, the son realized his excessive trust and overconfidence in his brother-in-law and had made it up in time by stepping in himself. In this case, the excessive trust in individual competence led to extra cost and may have misguided the entrepreneurial processes. As I mentioned before, contractual trust remains the least common type of trust in these companies, primarily because of the lack of sophisticated and well-functioning legal system that underpins the reliability and trustworthiness of contractual relationships. Although there were some vague indications of contractual trust in some case companies, like especially HIT 02 and Tax 92, they were fragmented and insufficient for meaningful analysis. HIT 02 and Tax 92 were the least family-oriented companies with respect to direct family involvement, and their trusting relationships were mostly built on individual competence and position responsibilities. Unlike Mac 95 and Tax 90, there was very little effect-based goodwill in the formation of trust in HIT 02 and Tax 92. And individuals were trusted specifically in their competent areas, which were often reflected through the contractual structure. In practice, the coordination activities across in practice, as a matter of fact, the position-specific competence trust required both owner managers in these two companies to coordinate different positions in the entrepreneurial process, which was potentially costly. So transfer, and in these cases as well, transfer of knowledge and expertise from the internal trustees to outsiders became very difficult, particularly when there is a lack of goodwill, which effectively undermines the altruism. So this slide, on this slide we show the conceptual model and the propositions as I introduced earlier. We had 4 propositions under there. So now, let's move on to the conclusion. Both family business and entrepreneurship literatures have found that trust is an important construct. However, studies on the role of trust as a relational form of social capital in entrepreneurial family business are still nascent. So in this project, our main purpose is to contribute to understanding the role of trust in entrepreneurial family businesses. To do this, we asked 2 questions, exploring where trust originated in family businesses and what effects it had on entrepreneurial processes. And in answering these questions, we adopted an inductive exploratory approach by focusing on second-generation Chinese family businesses. And our project confirmed that trust in the entrepreneurial Chinese family businesses that we studied is mainly constructed at the interpersonal level. And in China's transition economy, organizational and institutional level trust is still quite new and may only grow as the cultural and institutional environment gradually evolves. On the other hand, we also found that trust structure in Chinese family businesses was different from what the literature assumed before. Although kinship-based goodwill still provides the primary foundation on which trusting family businesses forms, competence-based trust has been increasingly evident, which allows non-family players to take a crucial role in the firm's entrepreneurial performance. And this finding is relevant to answering the second question as well, where we found a positive relation between competence trust and the greater openness in sourcing entrepreneurial opportunities and acquiring remote resources to exploit these opportunities, hence a greater external market orientation. Although these findings, as well as propositions we incorporated in our analysis, they still need some further efforts to testify, perhaps through larger scale studies by using mixed methods. We have made 3 contributions to the literature and provided insights for rethinking the relationship between trust, social capital, and entrepreneurship in family businesses. First, we contribute to the theorization of trust as a relational form of social capital. We have identified patterns of trusting relationships by drawing on their levels and the sources and related these patterns to investigating their different effects on the entrepreneurial processes among family businesses. Therefore, we argue that trust is a dynamic construct that develops in different patterns from different sources and results in different outcomes. And we have discovered enormous interpersonal trust stemming from individual level interactions either on the family side or the business side. And this clarification helps define the level of analysis and articulated the grounds on which trust was formed and maintained. The development of trust and social capital in turn is largely subject to the specific contexts in which social interactions take place. Therefore, understanding of trust as a relational form of social capital and its effects is authentic and realistic only when the contexts and antecedents of trust are clarified. Second, we have provided insights into the role of trust in the transgenerational Chinese family business context. Although the traditional view is evidenced in our study that kinship goodwill continues to be a fundamental base of trust in Chinese family SMEs, we have also found a subtle difference in the structure of trusting relationships. Individual competence and contractual commitments began to play a greater role in the formation of trust. And this has implications on the value system of second-generation Chinese family businesses, which was arguably in a transition from a family orientation to a market orientation, particularly in their entrepreneurial processes. Our third contribution is when we question the benefits of social capital by documenting some of the side effects of trust on entrepreneurial processes and outcomes. As such, we have extended the knowledge of social capital. Overall, there is a danger of the strong tie effect in the interpersonal trusting relationships based on either goodwill, competence, or contractual commitments, which restricts the truster to rely on the trustee and the trustees' networks to seek valuable information, acquire and deploy resources and evaluate and exploit potential opportunity. This exclusive reliance is likely to result in oversight of opportunities from remote sources, where we saw in some of the cases, where an established trusting relationship is not in place and the tie with the entrepreneur is weak. On the other hand, unrealistic overestimate of the trustee's competence may also lead to extra costs, or even unrealistic overestimate of the trustee's competence. So the result could be, the consequence could be even performance failure, some very serious consequences when the person who was trusted, when the person whose competence was trusted, create extra costs. So trust is vulnerable, as we understand, and easy to be damaged in such cases. Repairing it usually requires a high level of commitment and determination. Contractual trust continues to be weak in second-generation Chinese family businesses, and its effects on entrepreneurship tend to be marginal at this stage. It's arguable that trust based on a contractual relationship strongly emphasizes activities and responsibilities that are associated with the position, and it's difficult to transfer to other activities in the entrepreneurial processes, hence a need for coordination and alignment of different sets of activities. So these side effects combined provide empirical evidence for understanding the potential dark side of trust in entrepreneurial family businesses. Besides the theoretical and empirical contributions, our study provides practical implications for family business ownership, owner managers and the policy makers as well. For example, on the one hand, owner managers need a balanced view of who they can trust on what type of jobs. So reliance on kinship, goodwill, individual competence, or contractual commitments is likely to incur extra costs in both economic and non-economic terms to the firm's entrepreneurial processes. Therefore, owner managers are suggested to better understand why they have trust in certain actors in their business and the social networks before assigning resources, including human resources, to specify business activities. On the other hand, while the Chinese government has advocated a modern enterprise system where private firms are encouraged to be more market-oriented, policymakers need to recognize the benefits of the traditionally family-oriented values, and that kinship-based trust is also a relational form of social capital and can produce entrepreneurial outcomes. Like any study, our project has some shortcomings, limitations, which points to future research, hopefully. One of our shortcomings or limitations is associated with our interview processes. Although most interviewees in our study were willing to share information in an open manner, some of them were noticeably uncomfortable with interviews on the company premise and responded with relatively vague information or bypassed the topic sometimes. This was more notable among interviewees who were neither the owner manager's family members nor from a management position. So, restricted by the local business norm, interviews with employees had to happen during business hours on the side of the company. So we couldn't, as a matter of fact, we couldn't do anything in that area. And well, our second limitation concerns the data processing, particularly the translation of the data. Although my first language is Chinese, and I'm fluent. I'm still fluent after living in Australia for so many years. I'm still fluent in speaking Chinese. And also in our study, we adopted the back translation technique to ensure the trustworthiness of the translated texts. It's still possible somehow that some meanings might have been lost or twisted during the course of translation. Lastly, findings from our project indicate that there is a potential limitation with regard to the exhaustiveness of the sample, which was hard to predict beforehand, but could be addressed in future research by increasing the sample size. The three patterns of trusting relationships and the side effects may not be representative. There might be other patterns and effects as well, predominantly pertinent to contractual relations, which were not identified in this study particularly. Since trust is an elusive and heterogeneous concept, we call on researchers to specify the levels, types, and sources of trust in line with their research purposes. In addition, the less family-oriented trusting relationships in second-generation Chinese family businesses may suggest intergenerational differences, which call for further studies investigating the first-generation dynamics from the family and the business systems, as well as the impact of China's transitional socio-economic and socio-cultural contexts. To further examine our propositions on the making of trust and the effects of social capital on entrepreneurship, particularly the dark side of trust, larger scale empirical studies are needed by using both qualitative and a quantitative method. Also, drawing on our investigation in the general context of China's transitional economy and institutional structure, how trust in family businesses evolves as a relational form of social capital in other economies can also be a promising area for some future research. So, thank you very much for watching my presentation. I hope you have learned something or you have found something useful, valuable. Once again, thank you very much.